The first light of the morning slowly spread across the small village of Umadara. Birds sang happily from the trees, and a cool breeze moved gently through the narrow dirt roads. Most people were still asleep inside their homes, but one small house already had smoke rising from its old chimney. Inside the little house lived a young woman named Grace. Grace was 24 years old. She was a very fat young woman with soft brown skin, kind eyes, and a warm smile that made people feel welcome. Her clothes were old and simple, but they were always clean. She tied a colorful scarf around her hair every morning before she started work. Grace had no father. She had no mother. She had no brothers or sisters. She was an orphan. When Grace was only 6 years old, her parents became sick during a terrible disease that spread through the village. They both died within a few days of each other, leaving Grace alone in the world. She was too young to understand what had happened, but she remembered crying until she fell asleep every night. After her parents died, kind neighbors helped her whenever they could. Some gave her food. Others gave her old clothes. An elderly woman named Mama Esther taught Grace how to bake bread. She said, "If you learn a skill, you will never have to beg." Grace never forgot those words. Years later, Mama Esther also passed away because of old age. Once again, Grace found herself alone. The only thing Mama Esther left behind was a small clay oven, a few baking tools, and the recipe for making soft, fresh bread. Those simple gifts became Grace's greatest treasure. Every morning, Grace woke up before the sun. She never needed an alarm clock. Her body had become used to waking at 4 o'clock every day. She quietly folded her thin blanket and knelt beside her small bed. "Thank you, God, for another day," she whispered. "Please bless the work of my hands." After praying, she fetched water from a clay pot in the corner of her house. She washed her face and hands before putting on her apron. Her kitchen was tiny. The roof had several holes. The walls were cracked. The wooden table leaned slightly to one side. Still, Grace loved her little home. It reminded her of her parents. She carefully poured flour into a large bowl. Then she added warm water, sugar, salt, yeast, and a little cooking oil. She mixed everything together with both hands. The dough slowly became smooth and soft. As Grace kneaded the dough, sweat rolled down her face. The work was not easy. Because of her size, she became tired faster than most people. But she never complained. She simply smiled and continued working. When the dough was ready, she covered it with a clean cloth so it could rise. While waiting, she swept her small house and cleaned every corner. She believed that even poor people should live in clean homes. Soon the dough became twice as large. Grace shaped it into neat loaves and carefully placed them inside her old clay oven. The smell of fresh bread slowly filled the air. It was a sweet smell that traveled through the village streets. Many people smiled whenever they smelled Grace's bread. Everyone agreed that no one baked bread better than she did. As the bread baked, Grace counted the coins inside a small wooden box. 1, 2, 3, 4. She sighed quietly. The money was barely enough to buy more flour for tomorrow. There was nothing left for new clothes. Nothing for repairing her leaking roof. Nothing for comfort. But Grace refused to lose hope. She smiled anyway. When the bread was ready, she carefully placed each loaf into a woven basket. The basket was heavy, very heavy. Still, Grace lifted it onto her head with both hands. She locked the wooden door of her little house and began walking through the village. The sun was now rising above the hills. Children laughed as they chased each other along the road. Farmers carried hoes over their shoulders as they walked toward their farms. Women swept the front of their houses. Everyone knew Grace. "Good morning, Grace," an old man called. "Good morning, Papa Joseph," she answered with a smile. "Fresh bread today?" "Yes, sir. I'll buy 2. Grace carefully handed him 2 warm loaves. "Thank you," Papa Joseph said. "God bless your business." "Amen," Grace replied. She continued walking. Bread. Fresh bread. Soft bread. The words echoed through the village. Soon another customer waved. It was a young mother carrying a baby. "Grace, my children have been asking for your bread." Grace smiled. I baked it fresh this morning. The woman bought 3 loaves. As Grace handed over the bread, she noticed the woman's youngest child staring at the basket. The little boy looked hungry, very hungry. Grace quietly picked another loaf. This one is free. The woman looked surprised. Oh no, Grace, I cannot take it. Grace smiled. Please. The little one looks hungry. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. May God reward you. Grace simply nodded and continued walking. She never expected anything in return for helping others. Later that morning, Grace reached the village primary school. As children came out during break time, many ran toward her. Grace is here. The bread seller. I want one. She laughed happily as she served each child. Some children paid. Others did not have enough money. Grace always found a way to help. If you have only half the money today, she would say, bring the rest another day. Sometimes they never returned with the money. Grace never became angry. She believed hunger was a greater problem than unpaid debt. By afternoon, the hot sun burned brightly. Grace wiped sweat from her forehead. Only a few loaves remained. She sat beneath a large mango tree to rest. Her legs hurt. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt sore from carrying the heavy basket. She quietly ate the only meal she had brought, a small piece of bread and a bottle of water. As she ate, she noticed an old blind man sitting nearby. He looked weak, very weak. Grace stood up. She walked over and placed her own bread into his hands. Please eat, she said gently. The old man smiled. God sent you. Grace simply smiled back. I hope so. Now she had no lunch for herself. But somehow she felt happier. That evening, Grace sold her last loaf. She slowly walked back toward her little house. The sky had turned orange as the sun began to set. Children played outside while mothers prepared dinner. Some villagers waved as she passed. Others thanked her for the bread. When Grace reached home, she counted the money she had earned. It was enough to buy flour for another day. Nothing more. She placed the coins inside the wooden box and smiled. Thank you, God. I have enough for tomorrow. After cleaning her baking tools, Grace lit a small kerosene lamp. Its soft yellow light filled the room. She opened an old family photograph. It showed her father holding her while her mother smiled beside them. The picture had become faded over the years. Grace gently touched it. I miss you both, she whispered. I hope I am making you proud. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. Then she looked around her tiny house. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The walls needed repair. The floor was rough. Life was difficult, very difficult. But Grace refused to become bitter. She believed every new day was another chance for something wonderful to happen. She had no idea that her quiet life was about to change forever. Far away, in the busy city, a wealthy billionaire named Daniel Williams was preparing to leave his luxurious mansion. Tired of fake smiles and people who loved only his money, he wanted to discover whether genuine kindness still existed. Neither Daniel nor Grace knew that destiny was slowly bringing their paths together. The poor orphan who sold bread and the lonely billionaire were about to meet, and that meeting would change both of their lives forever. The city of Lagos never seemed to sleep. Cars filled the busy roads from morning until late at night. Tall buildings reached high into the sky, shining brightly under the morning sun. Businessmen hurried into office buildings carrying briefcases. Street vendors called out to customers. Everywhere people rushed from one place to another. In the middle of the city stood one of the most beautiful houses anyone had ever seen. It was not just a house. It was a mansion. The mansion belonged to Daniel Williams. At only 30 years old, Daniel was one of the richest businessmen in the country. He owned banks, hotels, shopping malls, construction companies, farms, and factories. His businesses employed thousands of workers. Many newspapers called him the young billionaire. His picture often appeared on the front pages of magazines. People admired his success. Many wished they could live like him, but very few people knew the truth. Daniel was lonely. Every morning, Servants prepared his breakfast before he woke up. They cleaned every room in the mansion until everything sparkled. His expensive cars waited outside with drivers ready to take him anywhere he wanted. Still, Daniel was unhappy. One Monday morning, he sat alone in his large dining room. The dining table could seat 20 people. Today, only one chair was occupied. A servant placed pancakes, eggs, fruit, fresh juice, tea, and coffee before him. "Good morning, sir," the servant said politely. "Good morning," Daniel replied. He looked at the food. He was not hungry. He picked up a fork but quickly put it down again. The room felt too quiet, too empty. Daniel sighed. Across the table hung a large family picture. It showed Daniel standing beside his parents many years ago. His father, Richard Williams, had built the family business from nothing. He had worked day and night until the company became one of the biggest in the country. Daniel's mother, Evelyn Williams, had always been kind and generous. She believed money should be used to help people. Sadly, both of Daniel's parents had died in a plane crash 5 years earlier. Since then, Daniel had inherited everything. The businesses, the mansion, the wealth, the responsibility. He had become richer than he had ever imagined. But he had also become lonelier than ever before. Just then, his personal assistant, Michael, entered the dining room. "Good morning, Mr. Williams." "Morning, Michael. You have a busy schedule today." Michael opened a tablet. "At 9 o'clock, you have a meeting with foreign investors. At 11, there is a press interview. After lunch, you will inspect the new shopping mall. At 4 o'clock, you will meet government officials. And tonight, you are invited to a charity dinner." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Cancel everything." Michael blinked in surprise. "Everything, sir?" "Yes." Michael looked confused. "Sir, these meetings have been planned for weeks." "I know, but I need a break." Michael carefully closed the tablet. "Very well, sir." As Michael turned to leave, Daniel spoke again. "Michael." "Yes, sir." "Tell me something." Michael waited. "When was the last time someone smiled at me because they liked me, and not because of my money?" Michael did not know how to answer. After a long silence, he quietly said, "I don't know, sir." Daniel nodded sadly. "Neither do I." Later that afternoon, Daniel walked through one of his office buildings. Employees immediately stood up. "Good afternoon, sir." "Welcome, sir." Everyone smiled politely. Everyone greeted him with respect. But Daniel noticed something. The smiles disappeared as soon as he walked away. No one spoke to him naturally. No one joked with him. No one treated him like an ordinary person. To everyone, he was simply the billionaire. That evening, Daniel attended the charity dinner. The ballroom was filled with wealthy guests dressed in expensive clothes. Music played softly while waiters served delicious meals. As soon as Daniel entered, many people hurried toward him. "Mr. Williams, it's wonderful to see you. My daughter would love to meet you. You should invest in my company. Would you like to join our board?" A young woman wearing an expensive evening gown smiled sweetly. "Mr. Williams, may I have this dance?" Before Daniel could answer, another woman interrupted. "I asked him first." Soon several women surrounded him. Each tried to get his attention. Each smiled brightly. Each spoke kindly. But Daniel noticed something. None of them asked how he was feeling. None of them cared whether he was happy. They cared only about his wealth. He politely excused himself and stepped onto the balcony. The cool night air touched his face. He looked up at the stars. "They don't love me," he whispered. "They love my money." An old voice spoke behind him. "Then stop letting them see your money." Daniel turned around. It was his family's elderly lawyer and longtime friend, Mr. Samuel Johnson. Mr. Johnson had known Daniel since he was a little boy. Daniel smiled. "Good evening, Uncle Samuel." The old man chuckled. "You look troubled." Daniel nodded. "I don't know who my real friends are anymore." Mr. Johnson folded his hands behind his back. "Your father once faced the same problem." Daniel looked surprised. "He did?" "Yes. When your father was young, He dressed like an ordinary man and traveled across villages. Why? He wanted to know how people would treat him without knowing he was rich. Daniel became curious. What happened? Mr. Johnson smiled. He met honest people. He met greedy people. He learned who truly cared. Daniel remained silent. The old lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder. If you want to know whether kindness still exists, leave this life behind for a while. Daniel looked toward the city lights. The idea stayed in his mind all night. The next morning he made a decision. He called Michael into his office. I'll be away for some time. Michael looked shocked. For how long, sir? I don't know. What should I tell everyone? Tell them I'm traveling for business. Michael frowned. But where are you really going? Daniel smiled. To find something money cannot buy. That afternoon, Daniel entered his bedroom. Instead of packing expensive suits, he chose simple clothes. Plain trousers, cotton shirt, an old pair of shoes. He even removed his expensive wristwatch. Then he looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, he no longer looked like a billionaire. He looked like an ordinary young man. Michael watched quietly. I've never seen you dressed like this. Daniel laughed softly. Neither have I. He picked up a small backpack. Inside were only a few clothes, a notebook, some bottled water, and a little cash. No luxury, no bodyguards, no private jet, no long convoy of expensive cars. He wanted no one to recognize him. Before leaving, Daniel walked one last time through his enormous mansion. The marble floors shone brightly. The expensive paintings covered the walls. The swimming pool sparkled outside. Everything looked perfect. Yet none of it had brought him peace. Daniel quietly locked the front door behind him. For the first time in many years, he walked alone. No cameras followed him. No reporters called his name. No security guards surrounded him. Felt strange, but it also felt free. He boarded a public bus heading toward the countryside. The city slowly disappeared behind him. Tall buildings became smaller. Busy highways turned into narrow roads. Soon, green fields stretched as far as his eyes could see. Farmers worked under the bright sun. Children played beside dusty roads. Women carried baskets on their heads. Daniel smiled. This is the life I've been missing. He did not know where the journey would end. He had no plan, no destination. He simply wanted to discover whether kindness still existed in the world. Hours later, the bus approached a peaceful little village called Umudara. Daniel looked through the window. He saw people greeting one another with warm smiles. He saw children laughing together. He saw simple houses surrounded by trees. Then he noticed something else. A young woman carrying a heavy basket of fresh bread walked slowly along the roadside. Even from a distance, Daniel could see how hard she was working. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. He had no idea that the young woman was an orphan named Grace. Nor did he know that meeting her would become the greatest blessing of his life. The bus rolled slowly into the village. A new chapter in Daniel's life was about to begin. The morning sun shone brightly over the peaceful village of Umudara. The air smelled fresh after a light rain during the night. Birds flew from tree to tree, singing cheerful songs. Farmers walked toward their fields carrying hoes on their shoulders. Women swept the front of their houses while children laughed and chased one another along the dusty roads. Grace was already busy. She had sold bread since sunrise, and her basket was much lighter than before. Only a few warm loaves remained inside. Sweat covered her forehead, but she continued smiling at everyone she met. Fresh bread, soft bread, hot bread. Her gentle voice echoed through the village. An elderly woman waved from the front of her house. Grace. Grace stopped and smiled. Good morning, Mama Rose. I've been waiting for you. Grace walked over and lowered the basket. I baked these only a few hours ago. Mama Rose smiled. I can smell that. She bought 2 loaves and handed Grace a few coins. Thank you, my daughter. You're welcome. As Grace continued walking, she quietly counted the money in her hand. It was not much. Still, she thanked God for every sale. Around the same time, A public bus slowly entered the village. Daniel Williams stepped down with his small backpack. No one recognized him. There were no cameras, no reporters, no expensive suits, no bodyguards. He looked like an ordinary traveler. Daniel smiled as he looked around. "This place is beautiful," he whispered. The village was so different from the noisy city. People greeted one another with warm smiles. Neighbors talked happily outside their homes. Children played without worrying about traffic. Everything felt calm. Everything felt real. Daniel decided to explore the village on foot. He greeted everyone politely. "Good morning." Some smiled back. Others simply nodded. No one knew he was one of the richest men in the country. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like a normal person. After walking for almost 2 hours, the hot afternoon sun became stronger. Daniel had brought only a small bottle of water. It was now empty. His stomach growled loudly. He laughed softly. "I should have eaten breakfast." He continued walking. Soon he realized he had wandered farther than he expected. The roads all looked the same. He had no idea where he was. The heat became almost unbearable. His legs felt heavy. His mouth became dry. Finally, he reached a large mango tree beside the road. He slowly sat beneath it. "I'll rest for a few minutes," he said quietly. He leaned against the tree and closed his eyes. His head felt light. His stomach growled again. He had not eaten since the previous evening. Not far away, Grace finished selling another loaf of bread. She noticed someone sitting alone beneath the mango tree. At first, she thought he was simply resting. But something did not look right. The young man looked pale. His shoulders hung low. His breathing seemed slow. Grace became worried. She picked up her basket and walked toward him. "Excuse me," she said gently. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. "Yes. Are you all right?" Daniel forced a weak smile. "I'm fine." Grace looked at him carefully. "No, you're not." Daniel tried to stand. The moment he got to his feet, everything around him began spinning. He lost his balance. Before he could fall, Grace quickly grabbed his arm. "Careful." Daniel steadied himself. "Thank you." Grace looked into his tired eyes. "When was the last time you ate?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't remember." Grace frowned. "You haven't eaten today?" He slowly shook his head. "No." Without saying another word, Grace reached into her basket. She took out the biggest loaf of bread she had left. It was warm. The smell filled the air. She held it toward Daniel. "Please, eat." Daniel looked surprised. "I don't have any money." Grace smiled. "I didn't ask for any." Daniel blinked. "You mean it's free?" He looked confused. "But this is your business." "I know. You need to sell it." Grace nodded. "I do. But right now, you need it more than I do." Daniel stared at the bread for a moment. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. In the city, people expected something in return for every favor. But this young woman, she expected nothing. Daniel slowly accepted the bread. "Thank you." Grace smiled. "You're welcome." She then removed a bottle of clean water from her small cloth bag. "Drink this too." Daniel looked embarrassed. "I can't take your water." "You'll need it." Grace laughed softly. "I live only a few minutes away. I can get more." Daniel accepted the bottle. He drank slowly at first, then much faster. The cool water refreshed him. He finally took a bite of the bread. It was soft, warm, fresh, delicious. His eyes widened. "This is the best bread I've ever tasted." Grace laughed. "Thank you. I baked it this morning." Daniel took another bite, then another. Soon he had finished almost the entire loaf. Grace smiled happily. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." Daniel looked at her. "You really made this yourself?" "Yes. I bake every morning before sunrise." "That's incredible." Grace shrugged. "It's how I earn a living." Daniel noticed the basket on her head. "It must be heavy." "It is." "Doesn't it hurt?" "Sometimes." "Then why do you keep carrying it?" Grace smiled gently. "Because if I don't work, I don't eat." Daniel remained silent. Her words were simple, but they carried great truth. After resting for several minutes, Daniel finally felt stronger. He stood up again. "This time I think I'll stay standing." Grace smiled. "Good." Daniel looked at her carefully. "What is your name?" "I'm Grace." "And you?" Daniel paused for a second. He had almost said his full name. Instead, he smiled. "My name is Daniel. It's nice to meet you." "You too." Grace noticed his backpack. "Are you visiting someone?" Daniel nodded. "I'm just traveling. I wanted to see different places." Grace smiled. "You chose a peaceful village." "It seems that way." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. A gentle breeze blew through the mango tree above them. Birds chirped happily. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you help me?" Grace looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "You didn't know me. I couldn't pay. You gave me your bread anyway." Grace smiled. "My parents taught me something before they died." Daniel listened carefully. "They said, if you have enough to help someone, then help. You never know when you'll be the one needing help." Daniel lowered his eyes. Those words touched his heart. No one in the city spoke like that anymore. Everyone seemed too busy chasing money. But here was a young woman who barely had enough for herself, yet she was willing to share. Daniel smiled. "I'll never forget your kindness." Grace laughed. "It was only bread." Daniel quietly replied, "Sometimes a small act of kindness means more than $1,000,000. Grace looked at him curiously. "That's an interesting way to say it." Daniel smiled. "I suppose it is." They both laughed. For the first time in many months, Daniel laughed because he truly felt happy. Not because someone expected him to. Not because cameras were watching. It was real. Grace glanced toward the village road. "I should keep selling before the bread gets cold." Daniel nodded. "Of course." She lifted the basket onto her head. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Wait. Let me help you." Grace smiled. "Thank you." Together they carefully lifted the heavy basket. Daniel was surprised by its weight. "You carry this every day?" Grace nodded. "Every single day." He shook his head. "You're much stronger than you look." Grace laughed loudly. "I have to be." She adjusted the basket until it balanced perfectly. "Thank you for helping." "My pleasure." Daniel hesitated for a moment. "Do you sell bread every day?" "Except Sundays." "Maybe. I'll buy another loaf tomorrow." Grace smiled warmly. "I'll be here." Daniel watched as she slowly walked down the dusty road. Fresh bread. Soft bread. Hot bread. Her cheerful voice echoed through the village once again. Daniel stood beneath the mango tree for several seconds. He watched until Grace disappeared around the corner. A strange feeling filled his heart. He had met many beautiful women. He had attended expensive parties. He had spoken with presidents and business leaders. Yet none of those meetings had touched him the way this simple bread seller had. Grace had given him food when she believed he was just a poor traveler. She had expected nothing in return. Daniel smiled to himself. "I think I've just met someone very special." Little did he know, Grace was thinking about him too. As she walked through the village, she smiled quietly. "That traveler seemed like a good man," she whispered. Neither of them realized it yet. But under the shade of that old mango tree, something important had begun. It was not love. Not yet. It was something much smaller. A simple act of kindness. And sometimes, the greatest love stories begin with nothing more than a loaf of warm bread and a heart willing to share it. The sun rose gently over the peaceful village of Umidara. Golden rays shined across the green fields, and birds filled the morning air with cheerful songs. Farmers walked toward their farms carrying their tools. Women swept the front of their houses while children prepared for school. Inside her little house, Grace was already awake. She had finished her morning prayer and was busy kneading fresh bread dough. She hummed a soft song as she worked. Although life was not easy, Grace always found something to be thankful for. The smell of fresh bread soon filled her tiny kitchen. She smiled as she carefully placed the loaves into her old clay oven. "Please help me sell everything today," she whispered to God. After the bread was ready, she packed the warm loaves into her large woven basket. She balanced the basket on her head and stepped outside. The morning breeze felt cool against her face. "Another beautiful day," she said with a smile. She began walking through the village. Fresh bread, soft bread, hot bread. Her cheerful voice echoed along the dusty roads. People smiled as they saw her coming. Everyone knew Grace. Everyone knew she worked harder than almost anyone else in the village. Not far away, Daniel walked through the village with his small backpack. He had spent the night in a simple guest house owned by an elderly couple. The room was small. The bed was old. The ceiling fan made strange noises. But Daniel had slept better than he had in his luxurious mansion. For the first time in years, he woke up feeling peaceful. As he walked through the village, he heard a familiar voice. "Fresh bread." Daniel smiled. "Grace." He followed the sound until he saw her speaking with an elderly woman. Grace handed the woman 2 loaves of bread. The woman searched inside her purse. After counting several coins, she looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Grace. I only have enough money for 1 loaf." Grace looked at the old woman. Then she smiled. "Take both." The woman shook her head. "I can't." Grace gently placed both loaves into the woman's bag. "You can. Just pay for 1." The elderly woman looked surprised. "But you'll lose money." Grace smiled softly. "I'll be all right." The woman thanked her many times before slowly walking away. Daniel had watched everything. Grace had not noticed him. He quietly thought to himself, "She gave away another loaf. Yesterday she fed a stranger. Today she helped someone who couldn't afford enough bread." He was beginning to understand what made Grace different. She cared more about people than about money. Daniel walked over. "Good morning, Grace." Grace turned around. A bright smile appeared on her face. "Daniel, good morning. You look much better today." "I feel much better too." "I'm glad." Daniel pointed toward her basket. "Business seems good." Grace nodded. "So far." Daniel smiled. "I'd like another loaf." Grace laughed. "I thought you might." She handed him a warm loaf. Daniel reached into his pocket. "How much?" Grace told him the price. Daniel handed her the money. Then he quietly added extra coins. Grace immediately noticed. "You gave me too much." "It's all right. You've helped me." Grace counted the coins. "No." She returned the extra money. "The price is the same for everyone." Daniel smiled. "You could have kept it." "I know. But it wouldn't be honest." Daniel slowly accepted the extra coins back. Very few people had ever refused his money. Grace had done it without hesitation. As they walked together through the village, Daniel asked, "How long have you been selling bread?" "Since I was 12. "You've been working for 12 years? Grace nodded. "I had to. There was no one else." Daniel looked at her. "Weren't you ever angry?" Grace smiled gently. "Sometimes. But being angry doesn't solve problems. So I chose to keep working instead." Daniel admired her answer. She never complained. She simply kept moving forward. As they continued walking, they heard loud crying. A little girl sat beside the road. Tears covered her face. Grace quickly hurried over. "My dear, what happened?" The little girl sniffled. "I was taking food to my grandfather. I fell. My food spilled. Now he has nothing to eat." Grace knelt beside her. "It's all right." She opened her basket. Without thinking twice, she placed 2 fresh loaves into the girl's hands. "Take these." The little girl looked shocked. "But my mother doesn't have money." Grace smiled. "That's all right. Go and feed your grandfather." The girl hugged Grace tightly. "Thank you." She ran away smiling. Daniel stood quietly. He counted. That was the 3rd time Grace had given away bread since yesterday. Each loaf cost money to make. Each free loaf meant less money for her. Yet she never hesitated. Daniel finally asked, "Grace, don't you ever worry about losing money?" She smiled. Of course I do. Then why keep giving away bread? Grace looked toward the road where the little girl had disappeared. When I was little, there were days I went to bed hungry. She became quiet for a moment. Some kind people helped me. If they had ignored me, I don't know if I would still be alive. Daniel listened carefully. So whenever I see someone hungry, I remember myself. I simply cannot walk away. Daniel lowered his eyes. Her words touched him deeply. A little later they reached the village market. The market was crowded. People bought vegetables, fruits, fish, and grains. Grace greeted almost everyone she met. She knew nearly every person by name. Good morning, Mama Janet. Good morning, Mr. Peter. How are your children? Everyone smiled when speaking with her. Daniel noticed something. People truly respected Grace. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, but because she had earned their respect through kindness. As Grace sold bread near one of the stalls, an old man suddenly collapsed. People gasped. Several villagers rushed toward him. Grace immediately placed her basket on the ground. She knelt beside him. Someone bring water. A young boy quickly returned with water. Grace gently lifted the old man's head. After several moments, he slowly opened his eyes. He hasn't eaten today, someone said. Grace reached into her basket again. She broke a loaf into smaller pieces. Eat slowly. The old man thanked her weakly. Daniel watched everything. Again, Grace never asked whether the man could pay. Helping him mattered more. As the crowd slowly disappeared, Daniel quietly asked, Grace, do you always put other people before yourself? Grace laughed softly. I don't think about it that way. I just do what I believe is right. Daniel smiled. You make kindness look easy. Grace looked at him. It isn't always easy. Sometimes I worry. Sometimes I'm afraid. But if everyone only cared about themselves, what kind of world would we have? Daniel had no answer. They continued walking until the afternoon sun became very hot. Grace sat beneath a large mango tree to rest. Daniel sat beside her. Grace opened a small cloth bag. Inside was her lunch. Only one small piece of bread and a bottle of water. Daniel looked surprised. Is that all you're eating? Grace nodded. I need to save money. Daniel looked at the tiny meal. You gave away better bread than this today. Grace smiled. They needed it more. Daniel shook his head in amazement. You amaze me. Grace laughed. I'm only a bread seller. Daniel looked directly at her. No, you're much more than that. Grace smiled shyly and changed the subject. So, what do you really do? Daniel froze for a second. He remembered he had promised himself not to reveal his identity. I travel. I've done different kinds of work. Grace nodded. It must be interesting. It is. But I think your work is more important. Grace laughed loudly. Selling bread. Daniel smiled. No. Feeding people. She looked at him for a moment before smiling. No one had ever described her work that way. She liked the way it sounded. As the afternoon passed, Grace sold almost every loaf in her basket. Only one loaf remained. Just then, a thin young boy walked by. His clothes were torn. He stared at the bread but said nothing. Grace called gently, Come here. The boy walked over slowly. Are you hungry? He nodded. She handed him the last loaf. He looked frightened. I don't have money. Grace smiled. I know. It's yours. The boy's face lit up with joy. He thanked her over and over before running home. Daniel watched him disappear. Grace's basket was now empty. She had sold many loaves. She had given away several more. Yet she looked happier than if she had kept every single one. As they walked back toward the village, Daniel quietly thought about everything he had seen. He had spent years surrounded by wealthy people. Many had more money than they could ever spend. Yet they often argued over small things. Here was Grace, poor orphan, a very fat young woman with almost nothing. Yet she shared whatever she had. Daniel looked at her walking beside him. Her clothes were old. Her shoes were worn. Her house was tiny. But her heart was richer than anyone he had ever known. For the first time in his life, Daniel realized something important. True wealth could not be measured by bank accounts. It could not be measured by expensive cars or beautiful houses. The richest person was the one whose heart was filled with kindness, generosity, and love. As the evening sun painted the sky with shades of orange and gold, Daniel smiled quietly. He had come to the village searching for honest people. Instead, he had found someone extraordinary. Without even realizing it, Grace was changing his life one simple act of kindness at a time. And deep inside his heart, a feeling he had never expected was beginning to grow. It was small, quiet, gentle, but it was real. Daniel was beginning to care about Grace in a way he had never cared about anyone before. The next morning, the village of Umadara woke up to another peaceful day. The sky was clear, and the cool morning breeze made the trees dance gently. Roosters crowed from different homes, announcing the start of a new day. Farmers picked up their tools and headed toward their farms. Children prepared for school while women swept the front of their houses. Inside her little house, Grace was already awake. She had prayed, washed her face, and tied her colorful scarf around her head. She poured flour into a large bowl and added warm water, yeast, sugar, salt, and a little cooking oil. As she mixed the dough, she smiled to herself. For some reason, she kept thinking about Daniel. "He seems like a kind man," she whispered. "I hope he's doing well." She quickly laughed at herself. "Grace, stop thinking about him. You've only known him for 2 days." She continued kneading the dough until it became soft and smooth. After placing the loaves inside the clay oven, she cleaned her little kitchen while waiting for the bread to bake. Soon, the wonderful smell of fresh bread filled her tiny house. She packed the warm loaves into her large woven basket and carefully lifted it onto her head. Fresh bread, soft bread, hot bread. Her cheerful voice echoed through the village once again. Not far away, Daniel stepped out of the small guest house where he had spent the night. The elderly couple who owned the guest house smiled as they saw him. "Good morning, Daniel," the old woman said. "Good morning, Mama Ruth. Did you sleep well?" "I slept very well. You looked happier yesterday." Daniel smiled. "I think I was." The old man laughed. "I told my wife the village would change you." Daniel smiled without answering. After thanking them, he walked toward the village road. Almost immediately, he heard a familiar voice. "Fresh bread." Daniel smiled. "I know that voice." He followed the sound until he found Grace talking to several customers. When she noticed him, her face brightened. "Good morning, Daniel." "Good morning, Grace. You came early today. I was hoping to buy breakfast before you sold everything." Grace laughed. "You're lucky. I still have plenty." She handed him a warm loaf. Daniel paid the correct amount. Grace counted the money before placing it into her small cloth purse. Daniel looked at the heavy basket on her head. "Can I carry that for you?" Grace laughed. "You? Yes. It's very heavy. I'll manage." Grace slowly lowered the basket. "All right. But don't blame me if your arms begin to hurt." Together they lifted the basket onto Daniel's head. The moment he stood upright, his eyes became wide. "This is heavier than I expected." Grace burst into laughter. "I warned you." Daniel laughed too. "I can't let you know I regret helping." They both laughed as they walked through the village together. People noticed them immediately. Mama Janet smiled. "Grace, who's your new friend?" Grace answered politely. "His name is Daniel. He's visiting the village." Mama Janet smiled warmly. "Welcome, my son." "Thank you." As they continued walking, Daniel realized how difficult Grace's work truly was. The basket pressed heavily against his shoulders. His neck quickly became sore. His arms ached from trying to keep the basket balanced. After only 15 minutes, sweat covered his face. Grace noticed. "You've become quiet." Daniel laughed. "I'm trying to save my strength." Grace smiled. "I carry that basket for hours every day." Daniel shook his head. "I don't know how you do it. I've become used to it." After another few minutes, Daniel finally admitted defeat. I surrender. Grace laughed loudly. I knew you would. Together they carefully lowered the basket. Daniel stretched his shoulders. My respect for you just doubled. Grace smiled. It's simply my job. Daniel looked at her seriously. No, it's much more than that. You work harder than many people I've ever met. Grace smiled shyly. Thank you. As they continued walking, Daniel noticed a small boy trying to push a wooden cart filled with firewood. The cart became stuck in the mud. The boy pushed with all his strength. It would not move. Grace immediately walked over. Let's help him. Without hesitation, she placed her basket on the ground. Daniel joined her. Together, the three of them pushed the cart. After several attempts, the wheels finally rolled out of the mud. The young boy smiled happily. Thank you. Grace smiled. You're welcome. The boy ran home, waving as he disappeared. Daniel looked at Grace. You stopped to help everyone. Grace shrugged. If we all ignored people who needed help, life would become very lonely. Daniel nodded. I think you're right. Around noon, Grace's basket was almost empty. She had sold most of her bread. The hot sun made both of them tired. Grace pointed toward the old mango tree. Let's rest. Daniel agreed. They sat beneath the shade while a cool breeze blew gently through the branches. Grace opened her cloth bag. Inside was the same simple lunch she ate every day. A small piece of bread. A bottle of water. Daniel looked at her. You really don't eat much. Grace smiled. I've become used to it. Daniel quietly broke his loaf into 2 pieces. Here. Grace looked surprised. No. You bought that. I know. But friends share. Grace blinked. Friends. Daniel smiled warmly. I hope we are. Grace smiled back. I hope so too. She accepted the bread. For several minutes they ate quietly. Then Daniel asked, Grace, what was your dream when you were little? Grace thought for a moment. I wanted a family. Daniel looked at her. A family? She nodded. I always dreamed of having parents who would come home every evening. She smiled sadly. I wanted brothers and sisters. Someone to laugh with. Someone to celebrate birthdays with. Daniel remained silent. Grace continued. But after my parents died, I stopped dreaming about that. My dream became much smaller. What is it now? Grace smiled. I want my bakery. Daniel looked confused. You already bake. She laughed. I mean a real bakery. A building. With shelves. An oven that doesn't crack. Enough bread to feed everyone. Daniel smiled. That's a wonderful dream. Grace looked at him. What about you? Daniel paused. He could not tell her the truth. Not yet. I want peace. Grace looked surprised. That's all. He nodded. I've learned that people spend their whole lives chasing money. But very few people chase peace. Grace smiled. I think peace is worth more. Daniel looked at her. I think so too. Later that afternoon, dark clouds suddenly covered the sky. Strong winds began blowing across the village. Grace looked upward. Oh no! Rain! Within minutes, heavy rain poured from the sky. People quickly ran toward nearby buildings. Grace and Daniel hurried beneath the roof of a small roadside shop. Rainwater splashed across the road. The weather became cold. Daniel noticed Grace looking worried. What's wrong? My bread. If rain reaches it, it will spoil. Daniel immediately removed his jacket. He carefully covered the basket. There. Grace smiled. You'll get wet. That's all right. You'll lose your bread otherwise. Grace looked at him gratefully. Thank you. The rain continued for almost 30 minutes. As they waited, they talked about many things. Favorite foods, childhood memories, funny stories, village life, city life. They laughed more than either of them expected. For Daniel, it felt natural. For Grace, it felt comfortable. Neither realized how quickly time was passing. Finally, the rain stopped. Sunlight returned. The village became lively again. Grace checked the basket. The bread was dry. She smiled happily. You saved today's sales. Daniel laughed. I'm glad. They resumed walking. By evening, every loaf had been sold. Grace counted her earnings. She smiled. It was a good day. Daniel nodded. You earned it. As they walked toward Grace's house, Daniel noticed the poor condition of the little building for the first time. The roof leaned slightly. Several wooden boards were broken. Parts of the walls had large cracks. Rainwater had washed away part of the foundation. Daniel felt sad. This is where you live? Grace nodded. It's not much, but it's home. Daniel looked around quietly. Inside, there was only a small wooden table, 2 old chairs, a clay oven, a narrow bed, and a tiny shelf with a few plates and cups. Everything was simple. Everything was clean. Grace noticed him looking around. I know it's old. Daniel shook his head. No, it's warm. She smiled. My mother always said, a clean home is a happy home. Daniel smiled. I think she was wise. Grace offered him a glass of water. He accepted it gratefully. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, Daniel stood to leave. Thank you for today. Grace smiled. No, thank you. You carried my basket. Daniel laughed. For 15 minutes. They both laughed. As Daniel reached the doorway, he turned around. Grace. Yes. I'm glad we met. Grace smiled warmly. So am I. Daniel walked slowly back toward the guest house. Along the way, he could not stop smiling. He had spent only a few days in the village. Yet they had become the happiest days he had experienced in years. He had found something he never expected. A true friend. Meanwhile, Grace stood outside her little house, watching Daniel disappear down the dusty road. She smiled quietly to herself. There was something different about him. He was humble, respectful, honest. He listened when people spoke. He never acted as though he was better than anyone else. Without either of them realizing it, their friendship was growing stronger every single day. Neither knew what the future held. Neither knew that greater challenges, and even greater blessings, were waiting just ahead. But one thing had become certain. The lonely billionaire and the poor orphan bread seller were no longer strangers. They had become true friends. And sometimes the strongest love begins with the simplest friendship. A week passed peacefully in the village of Umudara. Every morning, Grace woke before sunrise to bake fresh bread. Every morning, Daniel found an excuse to walk through the village so he could see her. Sometimes he bought bread. Other times he helped her carry the heavy basket for a short distance. The villagers had become used to seeing them together. Many people smiled whenever they walked past. They make good friends, Mama Janet often said. Grace smiled whenever she heard those words. She enjoyed Daniel's company. He was kind. He was respectful. He never laughed at her because of her size. He treated her the same way he treated everyone else. Grace appreciated that very much. One bright Monday morning, Grace had just finished selling bread at the village market. She counted the money inside her small cloth purse. It was another good day, she whispered. Just then, she noticed Daniel walking toward her. Good morning, he said with a smile. Good morning, Grace replied. You look happy today. I sold almost everything. That's wonderful. Daniel smiled. I was hoping we could walk together. I'd like that. The two friends slowly walked along the dusty village road. As they talked, they suddenly heard the loud sound of expensive engines. Virum, virum. Several shiny black SUVs drove into the village. The villagers stopped what they were doing. Children pointed excitedly. People whispered among themselves. Who could that be? I've never seen cars like those here. The SUVs stopped near the village square. A tall man wearing an expensive black suit stepped out. He wore dark sunglasses even though the sun was not very bright. Behind him came several bodyguards. The man looked around proudly. His name was Victor Lawson. Victor was a wealthy businessman from the city. He had recently been buying land in villages to build factories and shopping centers. Money was the most important thing in his life. He believed that everything had a price. Everything. Even people. Victor looked around the village with little interest. Then he smiled. "This place will soon belong to me." One of his assistants nodded. "Yes, sir. The land is perfect." Victor pointed towards several small houses. "We'll begin buying them today." The assistant opened a file. "Most of the owners have already agreed to sell." Victor smiled. "And the rest?" "We'll convince them." Victor laughed quietly. "Everyone can be convinced." Daniel watched from a distance. Something about Victor made him uncomfortable. Grace looked at the expensive vehicles. "I wonder why they're here." Daniel shrugged. "I don't know." A few minutes later, Victor began speaking with different villagers. Many accepted his offers. The money he offered was more than they had ever seen. Some families happily agreed to sell their land. Others asked for time to think. Finally, Victor's assistant walked toward Grace. "Excuse me." Grace smiled politely. "Yes. My boss would like to speak with you." Grace looked confused. "Me?" "Yes." She walked over carefully. Victor removed his sunglasses and looked at her small house in the distance. "Is that house yours?" Grace nodded. "Yes." Victor smiled. "I'd like to buy it." Grace looked surprised. "My house?" "Yes." "I'll pay you well." Grace shook her head immediately. "I'm sorry. It's not for sale." Victor's smile disappeared. "You haven't even heard my offer." "I don't need to. I won't sell." Victor folded his arms. "Why?" Grace looked toward her little home. "My parents built that house. It is the only thing they left me. I can't sell it." Victor laughed. "It's just an old building." Grace answered softly. "It may be old, but it is my home." Victor's voice became firmer. "I'll give you enough money to buy a better house." Grace smiled politely. "Thank you. But my answer is still no." Victor stared at her for several seconds. He was not used to hearing that word. No, people almost always accepted his offers. Money usually solved every problem. This time, it had not. Victor forced a smile. "You should think about it." "I already have. My answer won't change." Grace turned and walked away. Daniel quietly watched everything. He noticed the angry look on Victor's face. Victor was not happy. Not at all. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Grace sat beneath their favorite mango tree. Daniel finally asked, "Why didn't you sell?" Grace smiled. "I told him. My parents built that house." Daniel nodded. "But the money could have changed your life." Grace looked at him. "Some things are worth more than money." Daniel smiled. "I've been learning that." Grace laughed. "You've changed since coming here." "I think I have." That evening, Victor sat inside one of the luxury SUVs. His assistant handed him another file. "Sir, there is one problem." Victor looked up. "The bread seller." Victor frowned. "Grace." "Yes. Her land sits exactly where you wanted to build the main entrance." Victor closed the file. "I don't like problems. What should we do?" Victor smiled coldly. "If she won't sell willingly, she'll change her mind." The assistant looked nervous. "How?" Victor leaned back. "Leave that to me." The next morning, Grace woke up before sunrise as usual. She baked fresh bread and began selling it around the village. Business was good. By afternoon, only a few loaves remained. When she finally returned home, she stopped suddenly. Something was wrong. Her small bread stand outside the house had been knocked over. The wooden shelves were broken. The table where she displayed her bread lay in pieces. Several baskets were scattered across the ground. Flour covered the dirt like white dust. Grace dropped her basket. "No!" She ran forward. "My bakery stand." Her eyes filled with tears. Everything she had worked so hard to build was destroyed. Neighbors quickly gathered around. Mama Janet gasped. "Who would do such a terrible thing?" Papa Joseph shook his head sadly. "This happened while you were selling bread." Grace slowly knelt beside the broken wooden table. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the broken boards. She remembered building the stand herself. It had taken weeks to save enough money for the wood. Now, everything was gone. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Then another. She tried to stay strong, but she could not. She quietly began to cry. At that very moment, Daniel was returning from the guest house. He noticed a crowd near Grace's home. His heart began beating faster. He hurried toward the crowd. What happened? Mama Janet looked at him sadly. Someone destroyed Grace's bread stand. Daniel looked around. His face became serious. The broken wood, the scattered flour, the damaged baskets. He immediately understood. This was no accident. Someone had done it on purpose. Grace sat quietly on the ground. She wiped away her tears. I don't understand. I've never hurt anyone. Daniel knelt beside her. I'm so sorry. Grace forced a small smile. I'll rebuild. Daniel admired her courage. Most people would have become angry. Others would have given up. Grace simply spoke about starting again. Daniel gently asked, Do you know who did this? Grace slowly shook her head. No, but... She looked toward the road. I have a feeling. Daniel followed her eyes. Parked far away stood one of Victor's black SUVs. It remained there only a few seconds before driving away. Daniel narrowed his eyes. He said nothing, but inside his heart, he already suspected who was responsible. That evening, after helping Grace clean the broken pieces, Daniel walked back toward the guest house. He could not stop thinking about what had happened. Grace had done nothing wrong. She had simply refused to sell her home. Now someone had destroyed the small business she depended on to survive. Daniel clenched his fists. This isn't right. Meanwhile, inside a luxury hotel in the nearby town, Victor smiled as he looked out of the window. His assistant entered the room. The bread stand has been destroyed. Victor nodded. Good. Do you think she'll sell now? Victor smiled confidently. When people lose everything, they become desperate. And desperate people usually say yes. He poured himself a cup of coffee. Give her another day. I'm sure she'll come begging. But Victor had made one very big mistake. He believed Grace's greatest strength was her bread stand. He was wrong. Her greatest strength was her courage. And he also did not know something even more important. Grace was no longer facing her struggles alone. Without revealing his true identity, Daniel had quietly made a decision. He would not allow anyone to destroy the life of the kind-hearted bread seller who had changed his own heart forever. The battle between kindness and greed had just begun. And neither Grace nor Victor knew that the days ahead would change all of their lives forever. Grace hardly slept that night. She lay on her small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny house. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the broken wooden bread stand lying on the ground. She remembered how long it had taken her to save enough money to build it. Now it was gone. She wiped a tear from her eye. It took me 3 years to build that stand, she whispered. But I won't give up. After saying a short prayer, she finally fell asleep. Before the sun rose, Grace woke up as she always did. She stretched her tired body and quietly knelt beside her bed. Dear God, she prayed softly, thank you for giving me another day. Please give me the strength to keep moving forward. I don't understand why this happened, but I trust you. She stood up and walked into her tiny kitchen. Although her heart was heavy, she still measured flour into a bowl. She poured in warm water, sugar, salt, yeast, cooking oil. Then she began kneading the dough. As she worked, she tried to smile. If I stop baking, she told herself, I stop living. Outside, the first birds of the morning began singing. The smell of fresh bread soon filled her little house once again. Meanwhile, Daniel had been awake for hours. The previous evening, he had returned to the guest house feeling angry. He could not forget the look on Grace's face as she stared at her destroyed bread stand. She had worked honestly. She had harmed no one. Yet someone had attacked her livelihood. Daniel knew he had to help, but he also knew he could not reveal that he was a billionaire. If Grace discovered the truth now, she might begin treating him differently. He wanted her friendship to remain honest. As he thought quietly, an idea came into his mind. He reached for his phone. For the first time since arriving in the village, he switched it on. Within seconds, Dozens of missed calls and messages appeared. His personal assistant, Michael, had been trying to reach him for days. Daniel immediately called him. The phone rang once, then twice. Michael answered almost instantly. "Mr. Williams, I've been trying to reach you." Daniel smiled. "I'm all right, sir. Everyone has been worried. I'm fine. I need your help. Anything. I want you to send a construction team to Umadara." Michael sounded confused. "A construction team?" "Yes. They must arrive tonight." "Tonight?" "Yes. I'll send you the location." "What are they building?" Daniel looked toward Grace's little house. "A bread stand." Michael was silent for a moment. "Only a bread stand?" Daniel smiled. "Yes. And one more thing. They must work after dark. No one should know I sent them." "I understand. Can it be done?" Michael answered confidently. "It'll be ready before sunrise." Daniel smiled. "Thank you." After ending the call, Daniel switched off his phone once again. No one in the village saw what had happened. Later that morning, Grace carried her basket of bread through the village. Since her bread stand had been destroyed, she sold everything by walking from house to house. Many villagers noticed she looked tired. Mama Janet bought 2 loaves. "My daughter," she said gently, "how are you feeling today?" Grace smiled. "I'll be all right. You don't have to pretend to be strong." Grace sighed. "I know, but crying won't rebuild my stand." Mama Janet hugged her. "You have a brave heart." Grace smiled thankfully. Not far away, Daniel quietly watched her. The more he observed Grace, the more he admired her. She never blamed anyone. She never complained. She simply kept working. By evening, Grace had sold every loaf of bread. She returned home exhausted. After eating a simple dinner, she lay down to sleep. Within minutes, she was asleep. Around midnight, several vehicles quietly entered the village. Their headlights were turned off. The workers spoke in whispers. Michael stepped out of one of the trucks and looked around carefully. "This must be the place." He pointed toward the broken bread stand. "Let's begin." The workers immediately unloaded wooden planks, bricks, roofing sheets, paint, and tools. They worked quickly but quietly, hammering, measuring, painting, building. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the broken stand had disappeared. In its place stood a beautiful little bakery stand. It was twice the size of the old one. The wooden shelves were strong and polished. A small roof protected the bread from rain. There was even a neat sign that simply read, "Grace's Fresh Bread." Nothing else. No one knew who had built it. Before dawn, the workers packed their tools and quietly drove away. By sunrise, it looked as though the beautiful stand had always been there. The next morning, Grace opened her front door. She froze. Her eyes became wide. She blinked twice. "No!" She stepped outside slowly. The broken stand was gone. Standing before her was the most beautiful bread stand she had ever seen. She walked closer. She gently touched the polished wood. Felt real. Very real. Tears filled her eyes. "What? Who did this?" Soon, neighbors began gathering around. Mama Janet gasped. "Oh my!" Papa Joseph smiled. "This is wonderful." Children ran around the new stand, admiring it. "It's beautiful. It looks like a real bakery." Grace looked at everyone. "Did any of you build this?" Everyone shook their heads. "No, we only just saw it." Grace looked around in confusion. Then who? No one knew. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, pretending to be surprised. He looked at the new stand. "This is amazing." Grace nodded slowly. "I don't understand." Daniel smiled. "Someone must believe in you." Grace looked at him. "I wish I knew who." Daniel smiled quietly but said nothing. Deep inside he was happy. Grace deserved this. Very much. As the morning continued, villagers began buying bread. Business was even better than before. The larger shelves allowed Grace to display more loaves. Customers admired the new stand. Many people who had never bought bread from her before decided to stop. By afternoon, Grace had sold every loaf. She laughed happily. I haven't sold out this early in months. Daniel smiled. I told you. Someone believes in you. Grace nodded. I'll never forget this kindness. At that very moment, several expensive cars entered the village once again. Victor Lawson stepped out. He immediately noticed the new bread stand. His face darkened. What is this? His assistant looked confused. It wasn't here yesterday. Victor walked closer. He examined the polished wood. This cost a lot of money. Who built it? No one answered. Victor turned toward Grace. You rebuilt quickly. Grace shook her head. I didn't build it. Victor frowned. Then who did? I don't know. Victor looked suspicious. He did not believe her. Someone had helped her. But who? As he stood there thinking, another black luxury SUV entered the village. Several well-dressed men stepped out. They wore expensive suits and carried briefcases. Daniel immediately recognized them. They were senior managers from one of his companies. His heart skipped. They weren't supposed to come here. Michael had sent them to inspect a nearby construction project after finishing the bakery stand. Unfortunately, they had arrived while Daniel was still in the village. One of the managers looked around. Then he saw Daniel. His eyes became wide. Before Daniel could stop him, the manager hurried forward. Good afternoon, Mr. Williams. The other managers quickly followed. It's good to see you, sir. We've been looking everywhere for you. The entire village became silent. Grace stared at Daniel. What? Did he just call you? The manager smiled proudly. Mr. Daniel Williams. Our chairman. The owner of Williams Group. One of the richest businessmen in the country. Grace looked at Daniel in complete shock. She could hardly believe what she had heard. You. She struggled to speak. You're a billionaire? Daniel slowly sighed. He had hoped to tell her himself someday. Not like this. He looked into Grace's surprised eyes. Yes, I am. The villagers gasped loudly. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered among themselves. The billionaire? The one from television? The richest young businessman? Even Victor Lawson stood frozen. He recognized the name immediately. Daniel Williams. A man whose companies were far larger than his own. Victor suddenly understood. The mysterious bakery, the expensive construction, the quiet confidence. Everything finally made sense. Grace remained speechless. She remembered the young traveler who had sat beneath the mango tree. The man who had accepted free bread because he said he had no money. The friend who had carried her basket. The man who had laughed with her beneath the rain. He had been one of the richest men in the country all along. Daniel looked at Grace with gentle eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted someone to know me. Before they knew my money. Grace stood silently for several moments. Then, to Daniel's surprise, she smiled. A small, warm smile. The Daniel I became friends with is still the Daniel standing in front of me. Daniel smiled with relief. For the first time since his secret had been revealed, he felt hope. Perhaps wealth had not destroyed the friendship they had built. Perhaps kindness really was stronger than money. But standing only a few feet away, Victor Lawson watched everything with growing anger. He had planned to force Grace into selling her home. Now he realized she had gained a powerful friend. Victor quietly clenched his fists. This isn't over, he whispered. I've only just begun. The peaceful village had witnessed an unforgettable morning. Grace had received a wonderful gift. Daniel's greatest secret had been uncovered. And a dangerous enemy had just become even more determined. The days ahead would test every friendship, every promise, and every heart. The news spread across the village faster than anyone expected. By sunset, almost everyone in Umidara knew the truth. The quiet traveler named Daniel was not an ordinary man. He was Daniel Williams, one of the richest billionaires in the country. People gathered outside their homes, talking excitedly. I can't believe it. The bread seller became friends with a billionaire. No wonder those businessmen respected him. I've seen him on television before. Children ran through the village repeating the news. The billionaire is here. The billionaire is here. Grace stayed inside her little house that evening. She sat quietly on one of her old wooden chairs, staring at the small kerosene lamp on the table. Her mind was filled with questions. So, Daniel has been rich all along. She remembered the day they first met beneath the mango tree. He had looked tired and hungry. She had given him bread without asking for money. Now she wondered if he had been testing her. She lowered her head. Was our friendship even real? A gentle knock came at her door. Knock, knock, knock. Grace walked over and opened it. Mama Janet stood outside with a warm smile. My daughter. May I come in? Of course. Mama Janet entered and sat beside Grace. You've been quiet all evening. Grace sighed. I don't know what to think. Mama Janet smiled kindly. About Daniel? Grace nodded. I thought he was an ordinary traveler. So did all of us. Grace looked at the floor. What if he only became my friend because he felt sorry for me? Mama Janet gently held her hand. My dear, I watched both of you every day. He laughed with you. He carried your basket. He helped everyone you helped. I don't think pity looks like that. Grace remained silent. But he lied. Mama Janet nodded slowly. Yes, he hid the truth. But ask yourself one question. If he had told everyone he was a billionaire on the first day, would anyone have treated him normally? Grace thought carefully. She slowly shook her head. No, they would have acted differently. Mama Janet smiled. Exactly. I believe he wanted people to know his heart before they saw his money. Grace looked out of the window. Maybe Mama Janet was right. Still, she needed time to understand everything. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in the small guest house. The elderly couple, Mama Ruth and Papa Samuel, served him dinner. Neither of them acted differently after learning the truth. They still called him Daniel. They still smiled naturally. Daniel appreciated that. After dinner, Papa Samuel sat beside him. You look worried. Daniel sighed. I think I hurt Grace. You never wanted to. I know. But I kept such a big secret. Papa Samuel smiled. My son. Some truths are difficult to explain. But if your friendship is real, it will survive. Daniel nodded quietly. I hope you're right. The next morning, Daniel walked toward Grace's house. His heart beat faster than usual. He stopped outside the new bread stand. Grace was arranging fresh loaves on the shelves. When she saw him, she smiled politely. Good morning. Good morning, Grace. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strange. Daniel finally broke it. I owe you an apology. Grace looked at him. I'm listening. Daniel took a deep breath. When I came to the village, I wasn't looking for business. I wasn't looking for land. I wasn't even looking for love. Grace listened quietly. I was tired. Tired of people loving my money instead of me. So I came here pretending to be an ordinary man. Grace nodded slowly. You should have trusted me. Daniel lowered his head. I know. I was afraid. Afraid that if people knew who I was, they would stop being honest. Grace remained silent. Daniel continued. The day you gave me free bread, you believed I had nothing. You didn't expect anything from me. That was the first truly kind thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. Grace looked into his eyes. She could see that he was speaking honestly. I wasn't pretending when I became your friend, Daniel said softly. Every laugh, every conversation, every moment, they were all real. Grace smiled gently. I believe you. Daniel let out a deep breath. Thank you. The tension between them disappeared. Soon they were talking and laughing again, just as before. Across the country, however, newspapers and television stations had discovered where Daniel was staying. The headlines appeared everywhere. Billionaire Daniel Williams disappears to remote village. Country's youngest billionaire found living simple life. The story quickly became national news. Soon, many wealthy families became interested. If Daniel is unmarried, my daughter should meet him. Within a few days, expensive luxury cars began arriving near the village. Elegant young women stepped out wearing designer dresses, expensive jewelry, and high-heeled shoes. They carried expensive handbags and wore beautiful makeup. One of them smiled brightly. There he is. Daniel had been helping Grace arrange bread on the shelves when the women approached. Mr. Williams. Daniel turned around. Good morning. A woman with long black hair stepped forward. My name is Vanessa. My father owns one of the largest shipping companies. She held out her hand. Daniel shook it politely. It's nice to meet you. Another woman quickly stepped forward. I'm Isabella. My family owns hotels. A third smiled sweetly. I'm Sophia. I've admired your success for years. Within minutes, Daniel found himself surrounded. Each woman tried to start a conversation. Each tried to impress him. Each laughed loudly at everything he said. Grace quietly stepped back. She looked at the women. Their clothes were beautiful. Their shoes probably cost more than her house. Their hair looked perfect. Their hands were soft. Grace glanced down at herself. Her simple dress had been repaired several times. Flour covered part of her apron. She was a very fat village bread seller. She suddenly felt out of place. Daniel noticed Grace moving away. Grace, I'll just organize the bread inside. She walked into the bakery. From the small window, she watched the women smiling at Daniel. She heard one of them say, You should come back to the city. You belong with people like us. Grace quietly looked away. Maybe they were right. Daniel belonged in a world of luxury. Not in her tiny village. Not beside someone like her. Later that afternoon, Grace closed the bakery earlier than usual. She left without telling Daniel. When he turned around, she was gone. He looked confused. Where did Grace go? Mama Janet, who had watched everything, walked over. She went home. Daniel frowned. She didn't even say goodbye. Mama Janet looked at him carefully. Daniel, you may be a billionaire, but Grace is still a young woman. Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? Mama Janet smiled gently. She saw beautiful, wealthy women surrounding you. What do you think she felt? Daniel suddenly understood. He immediately walked toward Grace's house. When he arrived, he found her sitting outside beneath a small tree. She looked up as he approached. Hello. Hello. Daniel sat beside her. Why did you leave? Grace forced a smile. I was tired. Daniel looked at her kindly. No. Tell me the truth. Grace hesitated. Finally, she spoke. They looked perfect. Daniel frowned. Who? The women. They're beautiful. They're rich. They understand your world. Daniel smiled softly. And? Grace looked down. I don't. I'm just. She struggled to finish the sentence. I'm just a poor orphan who sells bread. Daniel waited quietly. I'm very fat. I've never gone to university. I don't wear expensive clothes. I don't belong beside someone like you. Daniel was silent for a few seconds. Then he smiled. Can I ask you something? Grace nodded. The first day we met, did you ask how much money I had? No. Did you ask where I lived? No. Did you ask whether I owned companies? Grace smiled. No. You only saw someone who was hungry. Grace nodded. Yes. Daniel looked directly into her eyes. And that's exactly why you're special. Grace blinked. You didn't care about my money. You cared about me. He continued. The women who came today, they learned I was rich before they learned who I am. But you knew my heart before you knew my bank account. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. Daniel smiled warmly. I've met famous people. I've met beautiful models. I've attended expensive parties. But I've never met anyone with a heart like yours. Grace whispered, Really? Daniel nodded. Really? Just then, a little girl ran toward them. Grace, I was looking for you. Grace smiled. What happened? My little brother is hungry. We don't have money today. Without hesitation, Grace stood up. I'll be right back. She entered the bakery and returned with 2 fresh loaves. Take these. The little girl smiled happily. Thank you. She ran home. Daniel watched quietly. Then he laughed. What? I think you just answered every question. Grace looked confused. What do you mean? Daniel smiled. You were worried those women were better than you. Grace nodded. But while they were trying to impress me, you were feeding a hungry child. Grace became quiet. Daniel stood up. Grace, I don't admire people because they're rich. I admire people because they're good. He smiled warmly. And you're one of the best people I've ever met. Grace smiled through her tears. For the first time since learning Daniel's secret, she truly believed their friendship had not changed. Far away, Victor Lawson watched everything from inside his black SUV. His eyes narrowed as he saw Daniel and Grace laughing together once again. He had hoped the truth about Daniel's wealth would separate them. Instead, it had brought them even closer. Victor clenched his fists. If money can't pull them apart, I'll find another way. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, Daniel and Grace walked back toward the village together. Neither of them noticed the danger quietly growing in the shadows. Their friendship had survived the truth. Now it was about to face an even greater test. The morning after Daniel spoke with Grace beneath the small tree, the village of Umudara seemed peaceful once again. The sky was bright blue. A cool breeze blew gently through the village. Birds sang from the mango trees, and children laughed as they walked to school. Grace stood inside her new bread stand, arranging fresh loaves on the wooden shelves. The smell of warm bread filled the air. Customers smiled as they walked over. Good morning, Grace. Good morning. I'll take 2 loaves. Thank you. Grace happily served everyone. Although she still thought about Daniel's true identity, her heart felt lighter than before. She believed him. She believed his friendship was real. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived carrying a small basket. Grace smiled. Good morning. Good morning. Daniel placed the basket on the counter. I brought some fresh oranges from the market. Grace looked surprised. For me? Daniel nodded. I thought you might like them. Grace laughed softly. Thank you. You really didn't have to. Daniel smiled. I wanted to. They talked happily while customers came and went. Some villagers smiled as they watched them. Others whispered among themselves. They look happy together. I think Daniel truly likes her. I've never seen him smile this much. Not everyone shared those happy thoughts. Across the road, Victor Lawson sat inside his black SUV. His face was filled with anger. He watched Daniel laughing with Grace. Every smile made him more frustrated. Victor slammed his hand against the seat. This is getting worse. His assistant looked nervous. What should we do, sir? Victor thought quietly. Then a cold smile appeared on his face. If kindness brought them together, then lies will pull them apart. The assistant looked confused. Lies? Victor nodded. People are quick to believe bad stories. He leaned closer. Spread rumors. What kind of rumors? Victor smiled. Tell everyone Grace is only pretending to love Daniel because he's rich. And tell people she's trying to trap him into marriage. The assistant hesitated. But sir, people know she's kind. Victor laughed. Even good people become victims of gossip. The assistant nodded slowly. I understand. By afternoon, whispers had begun spreading through the village. 2 women stood outside the market. I heard Grace knew Daniel was rich all along. Really? That's what I heard. Another woman joined them. They say she's only pretending to be innocent. Nearby, 2 men talked quietly. Maybe that's why Daniel keeps visiting. Perhaps she's after his money. Within a few hours, the rumors spread from one end of the village to the other. Grace knew nothing about it. She continued serving customers with her usual smile. Late that afternoon, Grace walked toward the village well to fetch water. As she approached, she noticed several women talking. The moment they saw her, they became quiet. Grace smiled politely. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, they replied. But their smiles looked forced. As Grace filled her bucket, She heard someone whisper behind her. That's her. The billionaire's woman. Another voice quietly said, She's clever. She found herself a rich husband. Grace stopped. Her heart sank. She slowly turned around. The women quickly looked away. Grace picked up her bucket and quietly walked home. She tried to ignore the whispers, but they hurt, very much. That evening, Daniel noticed Grace looked different. She smiled less. She spoke less. Finally, he asked, Grace, is something wrong? Grace hesitated. Then she quietly said, People are talking. Daniel frowned. What are they saying? She looked down. They think I became your friend because of your money. Daniel immediately understood. Victor. It had to be Victor. Grace sighed. They don't know the truth. Daniel smiled gently. I know the truth. Grace looked at him. But everyone else. Daniel interrupted softly. You don't have to prove your heart to people who refuse to see it. Grace smiled sadly. I wish it were that easy. The next morning, the rumors became even worse. A newspaper reporter arrived in the village. Someone had told the media about Daniel and Grace. Soon, cameras appeared outside the bakery. One reporter held out a microphone. Grace, is it true you're planning to marry billionaire Daniel Williams? Grace looked shocked. What? Another reporter asked. Did you become friends with him after discovering he was rich? Grace shook her head. No. A third reporter spoke loudly. People say you're chasing his fortune. Grace felt tears forming in her eyes. That's not true. The cameras continued recording. Daniel heard the commotion and hurried over. The moment he saw Grace surrounded by reporters, his face became serious. He stepped between Grace and the cameras. That's enough. One reporter smiled. Mr. Williams, is this woman your girlfriend? Daniel answered calmly. Grace is my friend. Another reporter asked, Do you believe she truly loves you? Daniel looked directly into the cameras. I know exactly who Grace is. The reporters became quiet. Daniel continued. The first day we met, she believed I was a poor traveler. She gave me bread. She gave me water. She expected nothing in return. The reporters listened carefully. Daniel's voice became stronger. If Grace cared about money, she would never have helped a stranger she believed had nothing. Silence filled the area. Daniel continued speaking. Some people judge others because of their appearance. Some judge because of their bank account. But I judge people by their hearts. He turned toward Grace. And Grace has one of the kindest hearts I've ever known. Grace looked at him with tears in her eyes. Daniel then faced the reporters again. I don't care if someone is rich. I don't care if someone is poor. I don't care about expensive clothes. I don't care about beauty contests. I care about honesty. I care about kindness. I care about character. The reporters lowered their microphones. No one interrupted him. Daniel gently took Grace's hand. He did not squeeze it tightly. He simply held it with respect. Then he spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I am proud to stand beside Grace. I am not ashamed of our friendship. If anyone has a problem with that, the problem belongs to them. The villagers watched quietly. Some lowered their heads in shame. Mama Janet smiled proudly. Papa Joseph nodded. I always knew Grace was innocent. One elderly woman wiped away tears. We judged her too quickly. The reporters slowly packed their cameras. One of them smiled. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I think we have the real story now. They left the village. Victor, watching from inside his SUV, became furious. His plan had failed. Instead of separating Daniel and Grace, the rumors had brought them even closer. Victor punched the dashboard. I don't understand. His assistant looked frightened. What now, sir? Victor's eyes became cold. If lies don't work, I'll create bigger problems. Meanwhile, Grace and Daniel slowly walked away from the crowd. They stopped beneath their favorite mango tree. Grace looked at Daniel. You didn't have to defend me. Daniel smiled. Yes, I did. Grace looked confused. Why? Daniel answered without hesitation. Because friends stand together. When people attacked your character, they attacked someone I care about. Grace smiled softly. You really mean that? Daniel nodded. More than you know. Grace looked toward the sunset. I've spent most of my life believing I had to face every problem alone. Daniel smiled. You don't anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cool evening breeze moved gently through the leaves above them. Children laughed in the distance. Life felt peaceful again. Grace finally smiled. A few days ago, I thought our friendship would end after everyone discovered who you were. Daniel laughed softly. And now, she smiled warmly. I think our friendship became stronger. Daniel nodded. I think so too. As they walked back toward the village, many people greeted Grace differently than before. Several women who had believed the rumors apologized. We're sorry. We shouldn't have listened to gossip. Grace smiled kindly. It's all right. I forgive you. Daniel noticed something. Grace never held grudges, even against people who had hurt her. That kindness amazed him once again. High on a nearby hill, Victor watched them disappear into the village. His anger burned hotter than ever. They've won this round, he whispered. But the game isn't over. He started the engine of his SUV. There are other ways to destroy hope. The black vehicle slowly drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Neither Daniel nor Grace saw it. They were too busy talking and laughing together. Their friendship had survived lies. Their trust had become stronger. But somewhere beyond the peaceful village, danger was quietly growing. And the greatest challenge they had ever faced was still waiting for them. Several weeks passed after Daniel defended Grace in front of the reporters. Life in Umidara slowly returned to normal. The rumors disappeared. People once again focused on their daily work instead of gossip. Every morning, Grace woke before sunrise to bake fresh bread. Every morning, the wonderful smell of fresh loaves drifted through the village, making everyone smile. Daniel visited almost every day. Sometimes he helped arrange the bread on the shelves. Sometimes he carried sacks of flour into Grace's bakery. Other times they simply sat beneath their favorite mango tree, talking and laughing for hours. The villagers noticed something. Their friendship had become stronger than ever. One afternoon, Mama Janet smiled as she watched them together. She quietly whispered to Papa Joseph, I don't think they're just friends anymore. Papa Joseph chuckled. I've been thinking the same thing. Meanwhile, Daniel's feelings had become impossible to ignore. Every time he saw Grace smile, his own heart became lighter. Every time she helped a hungry child, he admired her even more. Every time she laughed, he found himself smiling too. One evening, Daniel sat alone outside the guest house. The sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, painting the sky orange and gold. Papa Samuel, the elderly owner of the guest house, walked over carrying 2 cups of tea. Mind if I join you? Daniel smiled. Not at all. Papa Samuel handed him one of the cups. For several minutes they sat quietly. Finally, the old man smiled. You love her. Daniel looked surprised. Is it that obvious? Papa Samuel laughed. My son, you smile differently whenever Grace is around. Daniel looked toward the sunset. I've never met anyone like her. What makes her special? Daniel smiled softly. She sees people. Not money. Not status. Not appearance. Just people. Papa Samuel nodded. And how does she make you feel? Daniel answered without hesitation. At peace. The old man smiled. Then why are you still sitting here? Daniel laughed. I'm afraid. Afraid. What if she doesn't feel the same way? Papa Samuel shook his head. You'll never know unless you ask. Daniel smiled quietly. The old man's words stayed in his mind all night. The next morning, Daniel drove to the nearby town. It was the first time he had used one of his luxury cars since arriving in the village. He entered a small jewelry shop. The owner immediately recognized him. Mr. Williams. Welcome. Daniel smiled politely. I'm looking for an engagement ring. The owner became excited. Congratulations, sir. What kind of ring would you like? Daniel looked through several expensive displays. Some rings were covered with large diamonds. Others were decorated with colorful gemstones. After several minutes, Daniel pointed toward a simple ring. It had one beautiful diamond. Nothing flashy. Nothing extravagant. It was elegant and graceful. I'll take this one. The owner smiled. Excellent choice. As Daniel left the shop with the small ring box safely inside his pocket, he smiled to himself. I hope she likes it. Back in the village, Daniel visited Mama Janet. I need your help. The elderly woman smiled knowingly. I've been waiting for this day. Daniel laughed. You already know? My son. The whole village knows. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I want everything to be perfect. Mama Janet clapped her hands happily. Leave it to us. Within hours, the villagers quietly began preparing a surprise. The village square was decorated with colorful flowers. Children gathered fresh flowers from nearby fields. Young men hung beautiful lanterns in the trees. Women prepared delicious meals. Everyone worked together. Grace knew nothing about it. Mama Janet had told her there would be a small village Thanksgiving celebration that evening. Grace happily agreed to attend. As the sun began to set, lanterns lit up the village. Soft music filled the evening air. The decorations made the entire square look magical. Grace arrived wearing her cleanest dress. It was simple, light blue. She had carefully washed and ironed it herself. Her colorful headscarf matched perfectly. When she entered the square, she stopped in surprise. The place looked beautiful. What is all this? Mama Janet smiled. We wanted to celebrate. Grace laughed. You've all worked so hard. Daniel stood nearby wearing a simple but elegant white traditional outfit. Although he could have worn the most expensive suit in the world, he wanted to look comfortable and respectful. When Grace saw him, she smiled. You look nice. Daniel smiled warmly. So do you. Grace looked around. I've never seen the village decorated like this. Daniel smiled. Sometimes special moments deserve special decorations. Grace nodded, not realizing what he meant. The villagers enjoyed music and food. Children danced happily. People laughed together. Felt like one big family celebration. After some time, the village musician began playing a slow, gentle song. Daniel looked at Grace. Would you like to take a walk? Grace smiled. Of course. They slowly walked away from the crowd toward the large mango tree where they had first become friends. The lanterns hanging from the branches gave the area a soft golden glow. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel smiled. Do you remember the first day we met? Grace laughed softly. You looked like you were about to faint from hunger. Daniel laughed too. And you gave me bread. You didn't even ask for money. Grace smiled. I couldn't let someone stay hungry. Daniel nodded. That day changed my life. Grace looked at him curiously. Really? Daniel nodded. I came to this village because I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of people chasing my money. I thought I had everything. He looked into her eyes. But I was wrong. Grace listened quietly. I had wealth. I had success. I had houses. I had expensive cars. But I didn't have peace. He smiled gently. Then I met you. Grace felt her heart beating faster. Daniel continued. You showed me that kindness still exists. You reminded me that happiness doesn't come from money. You taught me that the richest heart belongs to the person who shares even when they have very little. Grace's eyes became wet with tears. She whispered, You've changed my life too. Daniel smiled. You accepted me before you knew I was rich. You became my friend when you believed I was just an ordinary traveler. You never asked me for anything. Not once. Grace smiled softly. I never needed anything. I was happy just having a friend. Daniel took a slow breath. There is something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. Grace looked at him. What is it? Daniel smiled. I love you. Grace froze. The world around her seemed to become completely quiet. Only Daniel's voice remained. I love your kindness. I love your honesty. I love your courage. I love the way you always think about others before yourself. You've shown me what true beauty really means. Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. She could not stop them. Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. He removed the small ring box. Then, without taking his eyes off Grace, he slowly knelt on one knee. The villagers, who had quietly gathered a short distance away, smiled as they watched. Children covered their mouths with excitement. Mama Janet wiped tears from her eyes. Daniel opened the ring box. The diamond sparkled softly beneath the lantern light. His voice became gentle. Grace, I came to this village searching for honest people. I never imagined I would find the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. You've made me a better man. You've filled my lonely heart with joy. I don't want to imagine a future without you. He smiled warmly. Grace, will you marry me? For a moment, Grace could not speak. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears flowed freely down her face. She looked at Daniel, then at the ring, then back at Daniel again. Her heart was overflowing with happiness. She remembered the lonely traveler beneath the mango tree, the friend who carried her heavy basket, the man who rebuilt her bakery without asking for praise, the billionaire who defended her when others believed lies. She smiled through her tears. Then she nodded. Yes. Daniel smiled hopefully. Grace laughed softly through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Cheers immediately filled the air. The villagers clapped loudly. Children jumped up and down with excitement. Mama Janet hugged Papa Joseph. Even Papa Samuel wiped away happy tears. Daniel gently placed the ring on Grace's finger. Then he stood up. Grace threw her arms around him in a warm embrace. The entire village celebrated. Music became louder. People danced beneath the lanterns. Everyone smiled. Grace looked at the beautiful ring on her finger. Then she looked at Daniel. You know. Daniel smiled. What? You never really needed money to win my heart. Daniel laughed. I know. You already gave me the greatest gift. Grace looked curious. What gift? Daniel gently held her hand. You showed me what true love looks like. As fireworks lit up the night sky above Umadara, the villagers celebrated the happiest evening they had seen in many years. But far away, inside a luxury office in the city, Victor Lawson stared at a newspaper headline announcing the engagement of Daniel Williams and Grace. His face became cold with anger. He slowly crushed the newspaper in his hands. So, they're getting married. His eyes narrowed. I'll make sure that wedding never happens. The joyful celebration in Umadara had marked the beginning of a beautiful future. But it had also awakened an enemy who was more determined than ever. The greatest challenge of Daniel and Grace's love story was still ahead. The news of Daniel and Grace's engagement quickly spread beyond the village of Umadara. Within a few days, newspapers across the country carried the story. Billionaire to marry poor orphan bread seller. Love proves money isn't everything. Many people were surprised. Some admired Daniel's decision. Others could not understand it. On television, people discussed the story. Why would a billionaire marry a poor village woman? She doesn't come from a wealthy family. She isn't famous. But many others smiled and said, perhaps he found something money cannot buy. Back in Umadara, Grace ignored all the attention. She continued waking up before sunrise every morning. She still baked bread. She still greeted her customers with a smile. She still gave free bread to hungry children whenever she could. Nothing about her changed. One morning, Daniel arrived at the bakery carrying a basket of fresh flowers. Good morning, my fiancé. Grace laughed. Good morning. You brought flowers again? Daniel smiled. I know you like them. Grace accepted the flowers happily. They're beautiful. Daniel looked around the bakery. I noticed something. What? You're still working every day. Grace smiled. Of course. Why would I stop? Daniel laughed softly. You know you'll never have to work again if you don't want to. Grace looked at him kindly. I know. But baking bread isn't just my job. It's part of who I am. Daniel nodded. I hoped you would say that. Grace smiled. I don't want money to change me. Daniel gently held her hand. And I never want it to. Meanwhile, wedding preparations had already begun. The villagers wanted the celebration to be the greatest the village had ever seen. Every family volunteered to help. Some gathered fresh flowers from nearby fields. Others cleaned the village square. The village carpenter built a beautiful wooden stage. Young men decorated the roads with colorful ribbons and lanterns. Children practiced songs they planned to sing during the ceremony. Everyone was excited. One afternoon, Mama Janet visited Grace. My daughter, I've brought something. She opened a large box. Inside was a beautiful white wedding dress. Grace's eyes became wide. It's beautiful. Mama Janet smiled. The women of the village worked together to make it. Grace gently touched the soft fabric. You all made this for me? Mama Janet nodded. Every stitch was sewn with love. Tears filled Grace's eyes. I don't know how to thank everyone. Mama Janet hugged her warmly. You already have. Your kindness has blessed this village for years. This is our way of blessing you. Grace smiled through her tears. Several days later, Daniel returned to the city for a short time to prepare for the wedding. His mansion became busy once again. His personal assistant, Michael, handed him a long list. The wedding planner is waiting. The photographers have arrived. The security team is ready. Daniel smiled. Cancel the fancy hotel. Michael looked surprised. Sir, we're having the wedding in the village. Michael nodded. Very well. Daniel continued. And cancel the expensive decorations. Michael blinked. But the decorations cost thousands of dollars. Daniel smiled. The villagers have already decorated everything. I wouldn't replace their love with money. Michael smiled. I understand. Daniel then visited the tailor who had prepared his wedding outfit. Instead of choosing an expensive designer suit, Daniel selected a simple white traditional outfit with light gold embroidery. It was elegant without being flashy. When the tailor asked why he had not chosen something more expensive, Daniel smiled. I don't want people to remember my clothes. I want them to remember our love. The tailor smiled with admiration. Back in the village, Grace continued baking bread until the day before the wedding. A young girl asked her, Grace, tomorrow you'll marry a billionaire. Will you stop selling bread forever? Grace smiled. I don't know. But I do know one thing. What? I'll never stop feeding hungry people. The little girl smiled. I hope I become like you someday. Grace gently hugged her. You'll become even better. The evening before the wedding, Daniel and Grace met beneath their favorite mango tree one last time before becoming husband and wife. The same tree where they had first met. The same tree where Daniel had once sat hungry and tired. Grace smiled. So much has changed. Daniel laughed. It all started right here. Grace nodded. With one loaf of bread. Daniel smiled. And one kind heart. They sat quietly watching the sunset. Neither needed to say much. Their hearts already understood each other. The next morning, the village woke before sunrise. People hurried from one house to another. Women prepared delicious meals. Large pots of rice, soup, grilled chicken, roasted fish, vegetables, and fresh bread filled the cooking area. Children wore their best clothes. The men arranged rows of chairs. Musicians tuned their instruments. Colorful flowers decorated every corner of the village square. The atmosphere was filled with excitement. Inside her small house, Grace stood before a mirror. Mama Janet gently helped her put on the beautiful white wedding dress. Fit perfectly. Grace smiled softly. I never imagined I'd wear a dress like this. Mama Janet smiled warmly. You deserve every bit of happiness today. Grace looked at herself in the mirror. She was still the same woman. The same very fat orphan. The same bread seller. Only today, she was also a bride. Meanwhile, Daniel stood outside wearing his white traditional outfit. Michael adjusted the collar. You look ready. Daniel smiled. I've never been more ready. Guests began arriving from every part of the country. Business leaders, government officials, journalists, Village families. Everyone gathered together. For the first time, rich and poor sat side by side. No one cared where anyone came from. They had all come to celebrate love. Soft music began playing. The entire crowd stood. Grace slowly walked down the flower-covered path. The sunlight reflected gently on her white dress. She looked beautiful. Daniel could not stop smiling. To him, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Not because of expensive makeup, not because of fancy jewelry, but because her kindness shined brighter than anything else. When Grace reached him, Daniel gently took her hands. "You look beautiful." Grace smiled. "So do you." The village pastor stepped forward. "We are gathered here today to celebrate love." He spoke about kindness, faithfulness, patience, forgiveness, respect. He reminded everyone that marriage was built on trust rather than wealth. Daniel and Grace listened carefully. Then came the vows. Daniel looked into Grace's eyes. "Grace, I promise to love you. I promise to respect you. I promise to stand beside you during good times and difficult times. I will never allow money to become more important than our family. I will always remember the day you gave a hungry stranger a loaf of bread. That kindness changed my life forever." Tears rolled down Grace's cheeks. She smiled and spoke softly. "Daniel, I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to stand beside you whether life is easy or difficult. I promise to remind you every day that kindness is the greatest wealth anyone can have. I loved you when I believed you had nothing. I will love you now that I know you have everything." The pastor smiled. "May I have the rings?" Daniel gently placed the wedding ring onto Grace's finger. Grace placed Daniel's ring onto his. The pastor smiled warmly. "By the authority given to me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." The crowd erupted into loud applause and joyful cheers. Daniel gently kissed Grace on the forehead. Everyone smiled. Children threw flower petals into the air. Music filled the village square. People danced happily. Laughter echoed across the village. The celebration continued for hours. Villagers danced beside wealthy businessmen. Children played with guests from the city. Everyone ate together. No one felt left out. As evening approached, Daniel stood to give a short speech. He looked around at the smiling faces. "When I first came to this village, I believed I was searching for honest people." He smiled at Grace. "I didn't know I was also searching for my future wife." The crowd laughed softly. Daniel continued. "Grace taught me that kindness is stronger than money. She reminded me that a rich heart is worth more than a rich bank account." He gently held Grace's hand. "I didn't marry the richest woman in the country. I married the woman with the richest heart." The entire crowd stood and applauded. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Grace smiled at Daniel. "You always know the right thing to say." Daniel laughed. "I learned from the best teacher." As the stars appeared above Umadara, lanterns glowed softly throughout the village. Music and laughter continued late into the night. For everyone who attended, it became a wedding they would never forget. Not because a billionaire had married, not because famous people had attended, but because they had witnessed a love built on honesty, kindness, humility, and respect. Far away, in his luxurious office, Victor Lawson sat alone in silence. A newspaper showing photographs of Daniel and Grace's wedding lay on his desk. He stared at the smiling couple for several moments. Then, without saying a word, he slowly folded the newspaper and placed it inside a drawer. His plans had failed. Daniel and Grace had become husband and wife. Their love had survived every obstacle he had placed before them. But although the wedding was over, a brand new journey had only just begun. The greatest adventures of their lives were still waiting ahead. Several months passed after Daniel and Grace's beautiful wedding. Life changed in many ways, but one thing never changed. Daniel and Grace remained the same kind people they had always been. Every morning they woke up early together. They prayed before starting their day. Then they shared breakfast while talking about the work they planned to do. Although Daniel owned many companies across the country, He spent much less time in his office than before. He had learned something important from Grace. Success meant more than making money. Success also meant helping people. One morning, Daniel looked out of the window of their beautiful home. "Grace," he called. She walked into the room wearing a simple dress and her favorite apron. "Yes, I've been thinking." Grace smiled. "I can tell." Daniel laughed. "You always know. What are you thinking about?" Daniel looked thoughtful. "When you were selling bread, you often gave free loaves to hungry children." Grace nodded. "I couldn't bear to see them hungry." Daniel smiled. "What if we could feed thousands instead of just a few?" Grace's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Daniel spread several papers across the table. "I want to build bakeries." Grace looked at the drawings. "Real bakeries?" Daniel nodded. "In villages. In towns. In cities. We'll sell bread at affordable prices. And every day, we'll give free bread to children and elderly people who cannot afford food." Grace covered her mouth with both hands. Tears filled her eyes. "Really?" Daniel smiled. "Really?" Grace hugged him tightly. "This is the best idea you've ever had." Daniel laughed. "I had a very good teacher." Within a few weeks, construction began. Workers built clean, modern bakeries in different communities. Each bakery had a large sign above the entrance. "Grace's Bread House." Below the name were simple words that everyone could read. "Kindness is always fresh." Grace smiled every time she saw the sign. One Saturday morning, they visited the first bakery during its opening ceremony. A long line of people waited outside. Some came to buy bread. Others simply wanted to meet Daniel and Grace. A little boy walked nervously toward Grace. He held only a few small coins. "Auntie, is this enough?" Grace smiled warmly. "What is your name?" "David." "Who are you buying bread for?" "My grandmother. She hasn't eaten since yesterday." Grace gently looked at the coins. Then she smiled. "You don't need these today." She handed him 2 fresh loaves. "And take these home." The little boy's face lit up with joy. "Thank you." He ran away happily. Daniel smiled. "Some things never change." Grace laughed. "I hope they never do." Soon, more bakeries opened across the country. People loved the fresh bread. But what they loved even more was the kindness they experienced there. No hungry child was ever turned away. No elderly person was sent home without food. The bakeries became symbols of hope. Television stations visited to report the story. One reporter asked Grace, "Many wealthy people donate money. Why did you choose bread?" Grace smiled gently. "When I was little, I knew what it felt like to be hungry. A loaf of bread may seem small, but to someone with an empty stomach, it means everything." The reporter nodded with respect. Millions of people watched the interview. Many were inspired. Soon, schools began inviting Grace to speak to students. She always wore simple clothes. She never acted proudly. At one school, a young girl raised her hand. "Auntie Grace, were you ever ashamed because people laughed at your size?" Grace smiled kindly. "Sometimes." The room became very quiet. "But then I remembered something." "What?" "My value doesn't come from my body. It comes from my heart." The students applauded loudly. Another boy stood up. "If you could go back in time, would you change your past?" Grace thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "No. If I had never been poor, I might never have understood hungry people. If I had never struggled, I might never have learned compassion. And if I had never sold bread, I might never have met Daniel." The children smiled. Meanwhile, Daniel had also changed many of his companies. He ordered that every employee should be treated with respect. Workers received better salaries. Parents received more time with their families. Scholarship programs were created for poor students. Free medical care became available for employees. One afternoon, Michael walked into Daniel's office carrying a report. "Sir, the company profits have increased again." Daniel smiled. "That's good." Michael laughed. "Do you know something?" "What?" Years ago, you only asked about profits. Daniel looked curious. And now, the first question you ask every week is, how many people did we help? Daniel smiled. I learned what really matters. One evening, Daniel and Grace visited the old mango tree where they had first met. The tree looked exactly the same. Its branches spread wide across the peaceful village road. Grace smiled. I still remember that day. Daniel laughed. I remember being so hungry. You looked ready to fall over. I almost did. They both laughed. Daniel looked around. So much has changed. Grace nodded. Yes, but this place reminds me where everything began. Daniel gently took her hand. I'll never forget it. Neither would Grace. A few days later, the villagers organized a celebration. Everyone gathered in the village square. Children performed songs. Women danced. Men played traditional drums. The village chief stepped forward. He smiled at Daniel and Grace. My children, when Daniel first came here, we saw only a traveler. When Grace first sold bread, we saw only a poor orphan. But today, we see two people whose kindness has blessed thousands. The crowd applauded loudly. The chief continued, You have reminded us that greatness is not measured by wealth. It is measured by the number of lives we touch. Daniel and Grace smiled humbly. They did not feel like heroes. They simply believed they were doing what was right. After the celebration ended, Daniel and Grace walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. Grace looked up. The stars are beautiful tonight. Daniel smiled. They are. After a short silence, Grace spoke again. Do you ever regret coming to the village? Daniel laughed softly. Regret? Yes. You left your comfortable life. Daniel smiled warmly. It was the best decision I ever made. Grace leaned her head gently against his shoulder. And meeting you was the greatest blessing of mine. Daniel gently kissed her forehead. The hungry traveler found far more than a loaf of bread. Grace looked at him. What did he find? Daniel smiled. He found home. Months later, the country honored Daniel and Grace for their work helping poor families. At the award ceremony, many important people attended. Business leaders, teachers, doctors, government officials. When Daniel was invited to speak, he walked to the stage holding Grace's hand. He looked at the audience. Then he smiled. I've received many awards in my life. For business, for leadership, for success. But none of them means as much as this. He looked at Grace. Because every good thing I've done since coming to Umadara began with one act of kindness. He paused. A poor orphan gave a hungry stranger a loaf of bread. She didn't know his name. She didn't know he was rich. She simply chose kindness. He smiled at the audience. Never believe that small acts of kindness don't matter. Sometimes, they change the world. The audience stood and applauded for several minutes. Grace quietly wiped away tears. As they drove home that evening, they passed one of their bakeries. Through the window, they saw children laughing as they ate warm bread together. An elderly woman smiled with gratitude as a worker handed her a free loaf. Daniel parked the car. Together, he and Grace watched without saying a word. Finally, Grace smiled. This is what happiness looks like. Daniel nodded. Yes. It doesn't come from money. It comes from making someone else's life better. Years later, people still told the story of the billionaire who fell in love with a very fat orphan bread seller. Some remembered the beautiful wedding. Others remembered the famous businessman. But most remembered something far more important. They remembered Grace's kind heart. Parents told the story to their children. Teachers shared it with their students. The lesson was always the same. True beauty is not found in wealth. It is not found in expensive clothes. It is not found in appearance. True beauty is found in kindness. True greatness is found in humility. And true love begins when two hearts choose to care for one another without expecting anything in return. And so Daniel and Grace lived happily together, not because they had everything money could buy, but because they had found something far more valuable. They had found love. They had found purpose. They had found a family, and every time the smell of fresh bread filled the morning air, it reminded them of the simple loaf that had brought two very different lives together forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from.